Coming to you live from Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome to Africa Focus, where we bring you news from across the continent right here on Switch TV Kenya. My name is Joel Chacha. Start interacting with us on our social media platforms at Switch TV Kenya, at Joel Chacha M on Twitter, and as well on Facebook, Switch TV Kenya and Joel Chacha. Send in an SMS via 22999 free of charge. But first, here are stories making headlines.
Kenya wildlife reserves threaten as tourists stay away. West African leaders call for the swift creation of a unity government in Mali.
We begin with the Africa Roundup stories.
These fishermen head out onto the lake before sunrise several times a week. They go to catch carp, an invasive fish in the Groenenvlei Lake on South Africa's scenic garden route. Carp was stocked illegally in the Groenenvlei Lake in the 1800s. Its numbers have grown and are threatening indigenous species.
We have a program where we eradicate common carp for the benefit of biodiversity here in the Vlei, in Groenenvlei. And the second facet of the project is that the carp that we take out currently from the Vlei, we donate it to our local communities as part of food diet, because fish is actually an important source of protein.
Initially simply a conservation program, the catch now goes toward feeding nearby residents. Volunteers have fished 13 tons of carp over the past 2 years. Today, the fish feeds 250 people every day. Tourism stopped abruptly during virus restrictions, leaving many here without an income.
Yeah, the fish is a relief. It's difficult during the lockdown for the children to get food, and money is scarce. So what can we do? But we are thankful for the fish. It's better.
Gift of the Givers, a South African humanitarian group, work with conservation officials and experts to check that the oily fish is safe to eat. The group then packages and hands out the fish to residents.
Now, we did a lot of study and homework before we actually got to the point of where we are today. The fish itself, yes, needless to say, it's all good, very good for human consumption. The locals actually love it.
The handouts offer some help to a few people during an extremely difficult time. South Africa's economy will shrink by over 7% this year because of COVID-19, the worst outlook in 90 years.
The Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam and a must for able-bodied Muslims at least once in their lifetime, is usually one of the world's largest religious gatherings. But only up to 10,000 people already residing in the kingdom will participate in this year's ritual, compared with the 2019 gatherings of some 2.5 million from around the world. Pilgrims walked into Mecca's Grand Mosque to begin the ritual with their first tawaf, the circumambulation of the Kaaba, a large cubic structure draped in gold-embroidered black cloth, towards which Muslims around the world pray. They were brought in small batches, walking along paths marked on the floor, in sharp contrast to the normal sea of humanity that swirls around the Kaaba during the Hajj. The pilgrims traveled later to Mina, another district of Mecca, where they spent the night. It sits in a narrow valley surrounded by rocky mountains and is transformed each year into a vast encampment for pilgrims. Worshippers today climbed Mount Arafat, also known as the Mount of Mercy, for hours of prayers and Quranic recitals. After descending, they will tomorrow gather pebbles and perform the symbolic stoning of the devil. Foreign journalists were barred from this year's Hajj, usually a huge global media event. Fatma Ngwena, reporting for Switch TV.
In the majestic plains of Kenya's Masai Mara, the coronavirus pandemic spells economic disaster for locals who earn a living from tourists who flocked there to see the abundant wildlife. Even before the virus arrived in mid-March, tourism revenues had plummeted, or rather plummeted, with cancellations from crucial markets like China, Europe and the US.
The song and dance of the Maasai people have long drawn tourists to Kenya. But these face masks are not part of their traditional clothing. They are a sign of the coronavirus, which has driven away their main source of income.
We completely depend on tourists to make a living in our community. We are currently faced with a huge challenge because they're not visiting anymore. They pay $30 to come to our village, and that helps us sustain our families. As we speak, some of our people are not able to provide for their families. Some are sick and can't afford medical care.
The Masai Mara is one of Africa's best-known savanna regions, popular for its mixture of private conservancies and national reserve land. The traditional herders who live here get much of their revenue from renting their land out to tourism lodges. Some also opt to work in these establishments as cooks or guides. But right now, lodge managers cannot afford to pay the Masai their usual rent.
This model depends on tourism. Tourists come into the camp and the money they pay to be in the camps for this to survive. So without this, so far what they're doing right now is that they're paying half.
With 4x4s, they are now empty. Nalakiti Sayalel has not sold any of her beaded necklaces and bracelets since the start of the year.
We cannot even sell our animals for money because all markets have been closed. Before the pandemic, at a time like this, I would make a lot of ornaments and make a lot of money.
Kenya declared its first COVID-19 case in March. Since then, international flights have stopped and national parks have closed. The capital, Nairobi, went into a strict lockdown. But trouble started even earlier for hotel and lodge owners. Over 80% of reservations were cancelled at the start of the year, many of them from Chinese or American clients.
If the landowners are not getting any revenue, they can't feed themselves, they can't send their kids to school, they would have no option but to look at other forms of land utilization. So whether that is fencing it off, whether it's selling it to people, and all those other alternate land uses don't go together with wildlife and elephants and big cats.
Kenya's tourism industry has already lost $750 million this year, according to official figures, roughly half of last year's total revenue. International flights here will restart in August, but the high season is already past, and many hotels will remain shut. As for the Masai, they hope that domestic tourists will come to their rescue and get them through the year.
Away from that, the World Health Organization Regional Director has announced that around 10,000 healthcare workers, most of them nurses, have been infected with the novel coronavirus in Africa.
We have had 10,000 healthcare workers. We're aware of 10,000 healthcare workers having been infected in the region. From the information that we are getting daily from our country teams, through, having come from the ministries of health, that the majority of those who have been infected have been nurses, but we have had all categories of healthcare workers, doctors, laboratory technicians, and even some of the people who are providing ancillary support in healthcare settings infected.
Shifting gears now to politics, West African leaders have called on for the swift creation of a unity government in Mali and a fresh vote after disputed elections, and called for sanctions against any efforts that will seek to oppose an end to the country's crisis.
Heads off the 15-nation regional bloc ECOWAS, stood by President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, but called for a unity government to be established rapidly and urged the opposition to join it. This is after West African leaders called for swift creation of a unity government in Mali and a fresh vote after disputed elections, but warned of sanctions against those opposing efforts to end the country's crisis. Ministers in charge of defense, justice, foreign affairs, national security and finance will be nominated before the unity government is created. Leaders also say the country's democratic constitution has to be respected. They asked an ECOWAS commission to consider sanctions against all those who act contrary to the normalization process of the crisis.
The establishment by ECOWAS of a sanctions regime against those who take actions contrary to the resolutions of this crisis.
The virtual summit, which lasted 3 hours, was convened amid fears among Mali's neighbors that the deepening crisis could cause the fragile state to slide into chaos. However, much of Mali's current tension was sparked in April when the Constitutional Court tossed off 31 results from long-delayed parliamentary elections benefiting Keita's party and sparking protest. Mali is a member of ECOWAS, which has intervened in several crises in West Africa, notably in Gambia, Liberia, and Sierra Leone.
Stay with us here on Africa Focus. Still to come.
Former Ivorian head of state Henry Konan gets elected as the candidate of the opposition Democratic Party of Cote d'Ivoire.
Welcome back to Africa Focus. My name is Joel Chacha. Elsewhere, former Ivorian head of state Henry Konan, who is 86 years old, announced that he was elected candidate of the opposition Democratic Party of Cote d'Ivoire, that's PDCI, for the October presidential election, with 99.7% of the vote falling a party convention.
Ivory Coast 86-year-old former President Henry Konan Bedi said that age is an asset ahead of being declared his opposition party's candidate for October's 10th presidential election. After years of political turbulence in the West African country, the election has been tipped into uncertainty by the sudden death of Prime Minister Gon Coulibaly earlier this month. Coulibaly was a popular figure, seen as the anointed successor of President Alassane Ouattara, who had ruled out standing for re-election on October 31st, but Coulibaly's death has tried speculation that Ouattara could run after all.
These results show a turnout of 94.08%, and my election with a score of 99.70% of the votes cast, a genuine plebiscite.
Henry Konan, who served as president from 1993 until he was ousted in a coup in 1999, is hoping to fill the power vacuum. He is the leader of the Democratic Party of the Ivory Coast, which held a convention in Abidjan to select its candidate.
The joy that fills me this day is immense. I feel happy and proud to have been elected as the PDCI-RDA candidate in the presidential election of October 31st, 2020.
Around 9,000 delegates will vote at 388 polling stations across the country in the party's primary, but the result is no doubt Bedi is the only contestant. Opponents of Bedi, who unsuccessfully ran for president in 2000 and 2010, have criticized his advanced age. In response, the PDCI party chief said that's the problem. Bedi's previous presidency came at a time when Ivory Coast was a haven of peace and stability in restive West Africa before the coup that removed him from power, a low-lying civil war, and the bloody political unrest that followed. Bedi said he hoped to fulfill a mission of public safety to restore Ivory Coast.
Now to some sad news. The Soweto funeral parlor has reached full capacity as daily COVID-19 coronavirus deaths surge in South Africa. Charles Motlabane mourns his late brother Modise, who died of COVID-19. He was remembered at a funeral service in Westpark Cemetery in Johannesburg. However, officials say the peak of the pandemic in the continent's hardest hit country is expected to end in the next few weeks.
Normally, this time in June, we are having plus minus 16, 18 bodies in the fridge, up to 20. But currently, we are sitting with more than 30, At some point, about a week ago, we were sitting at our full capacity, which is 44 bodies in the fridge. So it has really grown. In fact, it has doubled, to be honest. Keep a body. We have to bury the body within 3 days. But there are other logistics are a nightmare, like having to register for death, That on its own takes time. Having to book the grave, even getting the body out of the hospital have been also a challenge. So you've got the challenges were in the value chain.
Preparations, we used to like a whole week of preparations, and calling family members, you know. But now, wow, the things are made different. You can't even can't get close to the casket to view it going down. It's a mess, this thing, you know. It's just a huge mess.
I beg your pardon. I meant the peak of the pandemic in South Africa is expected over the next few weeks. Elsewhere, restaurants owners and staff gathered in Parktown, North Johannesburg to take part in a nationwide protest against South Africa's COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. Amid the rise of infections and deaths, a ban on the sale of alcohol has been reinstated along with the 9 p.m. curfew, both which have severely impacted the hospitality industry.
South Africa restaurateurs protested against a coronavirus curfew and an alcohol ban that they said were wrecking their industry. President Cyril Ramaphosa imposed a lockdown in March, restricting movements and gatherings. He loosened some of the restrictions in June, allowing restaurants to open initially for takeout and then for sit-down dining. But last week, as numbers of infections surged, he brought back a nighttime curfew and banned afresh the sale of alcohol.
In place. Saying that we can't serve alcohol is curtailing 60% of our revenue stream. That's number one. And remember, the 40% that's made on food is done by mostly people drinking alcohol. So saying that you can't serve alcohol in a restaurant is literally cutting that restaurant's wings off. The second thing is the 9 o'clock curfew means we need to stop serving food at 7:30 so we can clean and count and get our staff home in time before 9 o'clock. So not only can't we serve alcohol, but we don't have a dinner trade.
The whole situation has affected me both financially and emotionally. Financially in the sense that I can't afford my housing where I stay, I can't afford to feed my kids. At the moment I've got a newborn baby, but I can't afford to put food on the table for that person due to the fact that we're in lockdown. And emotionally it's kind of draining for me as a parent, just to find out, you know, like I wake up every day trying to put food on the table, but I can't afford to do that.
Waving a placard in the description, 32-year-old waiter Divine Moyo remarked, "Open we are, but normal is not the case." Many patrons were still skeptical about dining out, but lockdown measures have added to the eateries' woes.
Businesses should not be shut down. I think people can be careful, but I do believe that we need to stand up against a government that is not supporting its people.
In Cape Town, a city popular with tourists, restaurant owners laid out rows of empty tables and chairs along pavements or in the middle of streets in what they dubbed a 1 million seats of the streets demonstration. Restaurant Association of South Africa CEO Wendy Albert said nearly a third of restaurants had already shuttered since the onset of lockdown and more closures were looming.
The country, we currently estimate that 30% of restaurants have already closed their doors. Of the 70%, 50% of those restaurants really don't know if they'll ever be able to open their doors. It depends on certain pertinent issues like lifting the liquor ban, having the curfew lifted, engaging with the banks to change the lending criteria, having rebates on liquor licenses, SAMRO, SAMPRA.
Her members want the government to urgently consider lifting the liquor ban, having the curfew lifted, among other demands.
Now to the corridors of justice. A prominent Zimbabwean journalist who helped expose a multi-million-dollar corruption scandal involving the procurement of coronavirus supplies has been denied bail following his arrest on charges of inciting violence.
Prominent Zimbabwean journalist who helped expose a multi-million-dollar corruption scandal involving the procurement of coronavirus supplies was denied bail following his arrest on charges of inciting violence. Hopewell Chinono, 49-year-old, had in recent months been running a series of reports via Twitter and Facebook on the so-called COVID gate. He was arrested and charged with inciting the public to commit violence linked to opposition-organized protest against corruption.
Yes, he has been denied bail on the basis that he is a danger to the public and that if he is released, he will continue advocating for violent protests.
Prosecutors accused him of inciting Zimbabweans to join a planned anti-government protest during a coronavirus outbreak, which showed no regard for human life. Chinono was arrested the same day as opposition leader Jacob Ngavume, government president of the small party Transform Zimbabwe, had scheduled national-wide protest against state corruption and the country's economic crisis. But the demonstration was effectively banned when President Mnangagwa imposed a curfew and reinstated confinement measures to curb the spread of coronavirus. The planned demonstration was also going to coincide with the second anniversary of a general election won by Mnangagwa amid accusations of fraud. Harare magistrate Ngoni Nduna ordered Chinono back to prison and that he returned to court on August 7th.
I denied bail until they said I should come back on the 7th of August for the fact of reporting what the organizers of the 31st July protest had said. So
Chinono's lawyers, Douglas Collat, said they will appeal against the magistrate ruling at the High Court. The bail denial came as the UN's High Commissioner of Human Rights warned Zimbabwe against using the coronavirus pandemic as a cover to curb political demonstrations.
That's all here on Africa Focus, but keep the conversation going on our social media platforms at Switch TV Kenya, at Joel Chacha M on Twitter, and as well on Facebook, Switch TV Kenya. My name is Joel Chacha, and do have yourself a great time.